My name is Balázs Tarnok, the Director of Research at the John Lukács Institute of Strategy and Politics, and I'm going to be the moderator of this panel discussion on European values. Much is heard about European values these days in the past few decades, but some of the words may not be uncertain what they actually mean, these values. It seems that the European values actually are much rather a kaleidoscope rather than a consensus in Europe. And the question is still there, where do these values come from? Do they come from the Christian essence predating the 21st century, or are they the products of the modern and integrated world? Meanwhile, Europe and the European Union faces several pressing issues like migration, climate change, and we could of course go on. So there the main question emerges: should Europe be more pragmatic in defining its interests and obviously negotiating with its global partners based on material realities, or should it stick with the EU value-based approach? And this one leads to us a more general question whether the EU can pursue a purely interest-based or a purely value-based approach. One would argue that if we do approach a purely value-based focus, we may lose the realities and we may even harm our own interests. While these people also argue that if we stick to only interest-based approach, we lose the important yardsticks that may help us in navigating critical times. The driving questions of this panel discussion should be the following. How can the EU reconcile its ambiguous pronouncements on values with its more exact interests? How is Europe planning to address the challenge of aging demographics while still simultaneously grappling with rising political discontent surrounding migration? How does Russia's war against Ukraine influence Europe's role as a security actor? Is Europe becoming much more increasingly reliant on Washington, or is it solidifying its own security capabilities? Can we reach the EU's strategic autonomy as we see a declining American focus in Europe? And how can Europe position itself as a general geopolitical actor when it lacks a unified fiscal, energy, telecommunications, and defense framework sectors that are truly pivotal in defining contemporary power? In our panel discussion, we shall have 5 initiators. Jovana Marovic, not in the room yet. Ana Miguel dos Santos, former member of the European Parliament. Janusz Kowalski, member of the Parliament in Poland. István Kis, Executive Director of the Danube Institute. And Anahid Pilobosyan, Vice President of Strategy and Development from at the Applied Policy Research Institute in Armenia. And Jovana Marovic just arrived. Welcome. And we shall also have 4 discussants in this panel discussion: András Stefanovski, Vasif Huseynov, Kanchan Gupta, and Liliana Schmiech. I shall ask first our first initiator, Jovana Marovic, to give her introductory remarks on the matter in the length of approximately 4 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, here comes the Western Balkans perspective when it comes to Europe and the European Union and the values. 4 points for 4 minutes. The first one is it possible to be stronger if the European Union is no longer bigger, if it's not able to enlarge and to integrate new member states? The second thing is, how comes that no trade with values now is the European Union, the EU member states are trading with the values in the Western Balkans? Then the third thing is that the supranational community, which is based on values, now puts economy first and economic integration when it comes to the Western Balkans. And then finally, the question whether the European Union can reform itself. So starting with the enlargement, I have to say that there is already 11 years without new member states when it comes to the European Union. And if the enlargement is not happening in the current mandate of the European Commission, I think that it's not about, enlargement fatigue. It's about that enlargement process is not alive anymore. Then I have to say that if the European Union does not have its transformative power, it's not able to export democracy, it's not able to safeguard democracy, then, it's quite clear if it's not bigger, that it cannot be stronger. Then the second thing is that the current developments in the Western Balkans in the last, let's say, 10 years, the European Union was putting stabilocracy as one of the approaches, keeping autocracy in power just for the sake of the status quo and stability. And at the moment, we have the deal with Serbia, a so-called lithium deal, against the rule of law standards, against the environmental standards, against all the standards, just because of the money, just for the sake of the money, and values are going in the background. Then the third thing is that the European Union offered to the Western Balkans the growth plan, which is kind of, it's just based on economy, strengthening the economic integration among the Western Balkans. And I think that without political plan, without vision for the Western Balkans and the candidate countries, also Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, there is no, clear European future for all the countries which want to be part of the club, which want to strengthen the Western values. And then finally, my PhD was about the democratic deficit in the European Union, and the conclusion was that the European Union should strengthen the federal elements in its functioning in order to be more democratic. But the question is whether this is the limit of the European Union, both when it comes to for example, when we have now the war in Ukraine, is it this limit of the political, economic, and military support to Ukraine, whether the common foreign and security policy of the European Union can be the real pillar? The European Union is trying to reform itself from the Maastricht and from the establishment of the political union, as it's stated in the guidelines. But the question is how all these reform processes were based on institutional functioning, not about democracy, not about political union itself. So the question is whether this is the European Union maximum, and whether we are adapting to the new reality, or we are just, keeping the values and keeping the approach. So what we can do all together, the first thing is that we are always discussing the new momentum and wake-up call. I think that we are not clear when it comes to our citizens that they should wake up. So we have to insist that the change is possible even if the conditions are not fair. The second thing is that we need both policy and action on the ground. So the kind of joint approach when it comes to, institutions, and then civil society, academia, but also grassroots initiatives. And then I think that there should not be fight among ourselves, because at the moment there are donors which are, cutting the funds for the organizations which are protesting in Serbia against the lithium deal. So no trade with values. There should be political plan for the Western Balkans and the candidate countries. And I think that we have to work together, both policy and action on the ground.
Thank you, Jovana. And now I shall pass the word to Anna. And before I do that, I just want to know that due to the echo, please feel free to use your headphones if it helps you a bit to understand. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to say thank to the invitation. It is always a pleasure to be here. So I will try to say good morning in Hungarian. So, jó reggelt? No? So I do my best. So I just want to leave some topics about the main question, values or interests. So I would like to say both. We need both. We need to, and Europe need to harmonize both, speak with honesty, explain people the costs of both dimensions. Rebuild the relationship with citizens, speak about reality, not illusions, because the question is that values are intangible things. It's good to have it, but they are not tangible. So we need to change the paradigm. Instead of supporting our good speeches and our poetical speeches in illusions, we need more action. It's time we need to assume that we moved on by interests. So this is normal. This is about humankind. So the time of dreams is over. This is time of action and reality. Life is not a fairy tale like movies. So we need to change the paradigm and the approach. So it's time to give and create real hope, because we cannot build hope sustained in illusions. We build hope sustained in reality, because the citizens, when look at us politicians, and I mean like that, if you are constantly speaking about illusions, oh, I like you, I will give you everything of the world, this is not possible. This is not achievable. So what this means? It means that the citizens will lose the hope and the belief in yourself. So this is awful. And it serves to put citizens far away from the politics. And this is bad. So this is the only way to rebuild trust. With trust comes commitment. And with commitment comes prosperity and mutual understanding. We need to focus on that. So values are ideas, but we need to harmonize this with reality, achievable interests. We need to be honest with people. So we are 8 billion people, 8 billion. So how can we get consensus? Is impossible. So try to get some combine opinions. We need to be successful on trying to have majorities, and that's why we need to support more these regions opportunities, and to be more harmonized about that. So this is not magic, my friends. Politicians need to act and on reality, not in illusions, because politicians, this is the, when I was preparing this, comes this idea to my mind. This is the end of the era of illusionism. So the politicians need to stop. They are not here to sell dreams. They are here to manage common good and let the dreams to people. So, it's time to trust. So we need to give more space to realistic speeches and policies. And hope and faith doesn't come through or from illusions. Hope comes from beliefs and trusts.
Thank you, Anna. Janusz, what is your take on this matter? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to present my point of view, Polish point of view, on the crisis in European Union. First of all, I would like to say that, in my opinion, European values do not exist. And the project called the European Union is collapsing before on our eyes. The EU is ruled by the Germans, who treat the EU solely as a tool to advance their selfish interest. Bureaucrats in the EU fight Christian values and promote the climate agenda and gender agenda. The EU is incapable of solving any crisis or meeting any challenge. The policy of the bureaucrats from Brussels and Germany is the policy of successive crises in Europe. Some examples. The implementation of the Nord Stream project by Germany and Russia caused the war in Ukraine. Germany wanted to buy cheap gas from Russia and cause war in Europe. Germany wanted natural gas and German green technology sell to other countries in the European Union, so the Green Deal was adopted in 2019. And now the industry in the European Union is collapsing. The Germans want to sell their cars in South America, so with the Mercosur deal, they want to make agriculture collapse in Poland, in France, in Spain, maybe not. Germany brought millions of illegal immigrants to Europe, leading to another crisis. So what conclusion can be drawn from this? The problem of Europe is Germany and German policy. Any talk about the future of the European Union, about values without the elimination of German egoism is, in my opinion, meaningless. That is why the German idea of creating a single state called the European Union must be rejected. We need to reject the Green Deal, we need to bet on the free market, we need to robotize the economy to stop immigration, we need to do away with the bureaucracy in Brussels and corrupt subsidy system. Is this possible? Of course. It has to happen, otherwise, in my opinion, European Union will be plunged into further crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, Janusz. A characteristic opinion, and as the Hungarian opinion is often characteristic regarding the EU. István, what is your opinion on the matter or the Hungarian perspective? The floor is yours.
Thank you, and I would also like to thank the organizers, Glad and Samir, for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. I thought I was going to be the most skeptical here, but I guess after my Polish colleague, I might even seem a bit more optimistic. I think it was a very Polish speech, but I liked it. So agreeing with him, I also think that, I think we do have values, but sadly the European Union hasn't been pushing those values which we actually share. These values which are coming from Christianity and which is basically a mutual respect of each other's opinions. So I think the European Union could be successful in the past 50, 60 years is because we always had compromise, because we respected each other's opinions. Sadly, we don't really see that anymore in the European Union. And if we talk about values and the clash of values, I think partly because of this, I agree with him that we should abandon values in our foreign policy, which actually we have been doing in the past 20 years, and what America has been doing, especially under Democrat-led governments, is pushing values which sometimes not even our own people share. What I'm thinking of, let's say, for example, transsexual issues. I'm not sure that European foreign policy should be focusing on supporting gender-neutral toilets in Africa or the Middle East, this is not something which most Europeans share as a value. So we have values and we should focus more on those values, but abandon this value-based foreign policy which we have been pushing as a European Union for the past 20 years. Because we are just losing allies, potential allies, and we're losing out to countries like China, who has been investing very rapidly in Africa and Asia, because they don't have these unnecessarily lists that they bring into these countries. Now, another problem is, which has been mentioned already, is I think there's a disconnect between the everyday people of Europe and its leaders. We are ruled by bureaucrats. I mean, we don't really have statement-like figures in Europe beside Viktor Orban, Hungary's prime minister, and perhaps Macron, the leader of France, whose policies I don't support, but I do agree that I think he's a statement-like figure. Beside that, most of the leaders of Europe are bureaucrats. This is especially true for the European Union. Again, with all due respect to some of the former or current members of European Parliament, there's a lot of good people there as well. But sadly, most of them are bureaucrats. Yes, I think Anna is one of them. But a lot of them are bureaucrats who lost touch with reality. So regularly I attend meetings where we talk about all the nice things. One of the, I think, most telling examples was a meeting I attended in the European Parliament after about 1 year of COVID, where everybody was patting each other's back how much the European did in vaccine rollouts in the Balkans. The whole thing was a lie. the European Union acted very slowly. I mean, as we Hungarians know as well, we were not getting vaccines from the European Union, so they were not helping even their own people, not to mention the Balkans. But these people were sitting there saying all these nice stories, how wonderfully the European Union did. Another example, I think, is migration, where our own populations have been very strongly and regularly saying that they do not want more migration. Despite this, we had governments and we had the European Union which did hardly anything about this, or if they did something, it actually helped more migration. So I think, agreeing with Anna and, of course, partly with my Polish colleague Janusz, I think we need much more realistic thinking. We need more national interests in our foreign policy, and we also need to go back to our original values. Thank you.
Thank you, István. And now let's move to Anahid and the Armenian perspective on the matter. The floor is yours.
Yes, so I would like to make three broad points. The first one relates to the separation of politics and policies. So what we are observing in the EU is that what the challenges it faces are politics, while the policies are developed at the EU level. Today, the EU has three existential challenges: security, migration, and economic growth. And these are the topics that are traditionally made by nation states, and we still have member state level competencies around that. This is just an observation. Another way I'd like to illustrate this divide between member state level politics and EU level policies is what a Dutch senior official once told me. When everything is working well in the EU, we praise ourselves, member states, but when everything is wrong with the EU, it's always the EU's fault. And I believe it's a very fundamental issue that must be addressed if, to reconcile this misalignment of political interests among the 27, if the EU wants to survive as a project. And I'd like to also, I'm going to move to my second point by quoting Jean-Claude Juncker, who was previously European Commission President, who said, "We know what we must do, but we don't know how and get re-elected at the same time." And yet the how is very important. Second point is on the lack of strategic thinking that I can observe sitting from Armenia. I'll give you two illustrations of the lack of strategic thinking. One is on European competitiveness. If you look at European companies by market capitalization, there are very, very few in the tech sector. The European talent on tech is going to the US. It is not staying in the EU. What did the EU did? They did a catchy phrase of digital Europe, and then they did some EU-US collaboration on the topic, and that's it. I do not see strategic thinking here. The second illustration is something that's closer to our think tank in our region, is the EU's lack of strategic thinking on foreign policy, especially when it comes to the South Caucasus. So as you may know, the EU has been mostly engaged since 2022, the war in Ukraine, with the three countries of the South Caucasus, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. While this is very great and we appreciate the efforts, the subsequent events have stress-tested the EU's foreign policy, and we can see that actually it's not delivering the fruits that it was seeking to deliver. And I insist on that because if you look at the political guidelines of the current Commission, it does state that it aspires to be a global geopolitical foreign policy heavyweight. And it's not really happening. Why? Well, because you have this inconsistency in the foreign policy between values and interests, and you can look at how, they're not really unclear on what they should follow when you look at the South Caucasus between a values-based foreign policy agenda or one that is driven by short-term energy interests. And I was pleased to see that in the mission letter of the Commissioner for Enlargement, Ursula von der Leyen mentioned that her task is to deliver a consistent approach to the South Caucasus. Good luck with that, but it is important. Lastly, I'd like to come back, my last point. on the US. Because, historically, as we all know, the EU was created through the strong support of the US after the Second World War. And we had a very strong coordination between the Biden administration and the previous commission. Now this is going to change. And we know also that, the three new foreign policy representatives, von der Leyen, Costa, and Kallas, are very strongly supporting Ukraine. And this is not likely to continue under the blessing of Trump. So, the EU defines itself with its relationship with the US, among other things. And I believe that this is a good shock in the system to actually come together and think through how it can define itself and unite among the 27.
Thank you, Anahid. And now let's move to our discussants. First, András Stefanowski. The floor is yours, András.
Thank you very much for the invitation to this most important inaugural forum. I will be less practical than my colleagues on this panel. But I'd like to give a short commentary on how I see what is effectively the real question behind our discussions. How might our ailing Europe rediscover itself and return to a position of greatness, leadership, and virtue? Let me start with the diagnosis. So the great illness of contemporary Europe is its dramatic loss of confidence in the last 2 to 3 decades. We are talking about an internal crisis that prevents Europe from responding effectively to external crises. As many have observed, Europe is no longer a global player to look up to and contemplate. It is no longer a mighty military power to be feared and respected, or a continent of youthful dynamism. It's not a home of innovation and intellect, not a competitive economic powerhouse of the international economy, and most importantly, it is no longer a beacon of human virtue and a creator of beauty, art, and timeless value. Europe today is slow, faint, old, and lethargic, and confused to the core. What good is it to be rich and developed if Europe is shrinking by the day, ravaged also by a demographic catastrophe supplemented with suicidal tendencies like murder of our own children, assisted suicide, culture of self-repudiation, and so on and so forth. In short, Europe has lost its confidence, its sense of mission, its will to carry on. Who are we? Why do we exist? What good are we to do for humanity? Is it still worth fighting for, or should we simply let others lead? Now let me turn to the ailment. Well, when you've already tasted greatness, you have a history and a pool of experience to look to in times of disorientation and decline. So what made Europe great? And how can we make Europe great again? Well, the late Pope Benedict XVI found that the real strength of Europe once lay in the unenforced melding of Christian faith, virtue, and intellectual tradition, Greek philosophical tradition, and thirdly, the modern liberties that refuse to bend to positivism, scientific reductionism, relativism, and irrationality. The late Sir Roger Scruton challenged the primacy of liberty because he emphasized instead the authority of establishment, which is the source of order, inheritance, property, solidarity, trust, and care. And if we consider what made the European Union a successful project for the first part of its existence, we see that strength sprung from a common will to be united in diversity, i.e. diversity in the traditional sense, i.e. harness the many qualities and strengths of being a Europe of unique national cultures, histories, traditions, diverse political and economic systems. An ideological drive for uniformity in thinking, in values, political culture, and customs generates loss of the European competitive edge created in its national forges. I conclude by claiming that when, and not if, the people of Europe en masse succeed in regaining from their homegrown anti-European elites the upper hand in charting their own future, as we have started witnessing this year with the EP elections and a number of other national elections, then Europe will once again have a shot at greatness and leadership through a rediscovery of the qualities that once fueled its tremendous civilizational strength. I'm encouraged by a lesson, and I'm going to conclude on this. I'm encouraged by a lesson I learned during a conversation I had in India just last month, according to which no nation may be considered small and insignificant if they have a long history and a rich sovereign identity to look to. This is a lesson for Europe just as much as it is a lesson for Hungary. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Andras. And let's move to Vasif on behalf of the Center of Analysis of International Relations in Azerbaijan. Vasif, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will try to briefly present the perspectives from the South Caucasus, where I am from, the region that hosts Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia. These three countries are part of the Eastern Partnership Program of the EU. And when our country joined the Eastern Partnership, the European values were part of the motivation. And along with European integration, democracy, and civil liberties. Today, this picture has slightly changed, as there is a confusion in our part of the world about the European values. The question is often asked, what are the European values? Are these traditional values which were associated with good old West, or like LGBT, homosexuality, xenophobia, and etc. Against this background, there has been a shift in the approaches of the people in the region concerning the European integration. But at the same time, it's the fact that there are a significant number of people who are still supporting European integration in the South Caucasus. And if you see developments in Georgia, where people are still very supportive of European integration, as well as in Armenia. But it may sound that the situation is different in Azerbaijan, but it is, of course, a little bit different. But at the same time, there is the fact that the national security concept of Azerbaijan, adopted in 2007, declared Euro-Atlantic integration as a priority of the country's foreign policy. But as just 1 year after adoption of the national security concept, the Russia-Georgia war started. And it was a shock to Azerbaijan and to other countries in the post-Soviet space that the Euro-Atlantic integration is coming with strings attached, with security threats attached. And unfortunately, the European Union or the United States were not able to provide security of Georgia at that time. So after this, there has been some shift in the approaches of Azerbaijan as well as Armenia towards the Euro-Atlantic integration. But today, in our part of the world, it is one of the priority of the countries because the people still associate democracy, civil liberties, political equality, pluralism, and this sort of values with the Euro-Atlantic integration. And it is the fact that motivates the people to support their close relationship with the EU. But some of my colleagues today mentioned it's the fact that there is a disbalance between value-based foreign policy or interest-based foreign policy. But it's something seriously appreciated by regional experts like myself, that there should be a balance, and it's a balance that we believe the European Union is still maintaining in its relations with the countries of the South Caucasus. Thank you.
Thank you, Vasif. And now I shall ask Kanchan Gupta to share his views on the matter, Senior Advisor, the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, Government of India. The floor is yours.
Thank you for inviting me to speak at this roundtable. I will try and avoid the political part of it for obvious reasons. We have been talking about identity, sovereignty, values, but all these essentially stem from culture, your cultural perspective. That seems to have been eroded, and not only eroded, we now have a Europe which was so proud of its culture, which was so full of its culture, has turned into an entity that is constantly self-excoriating, self-flagellating, almost apologetic to the rest of the world. The devastation of the First World War was so shocking that India realized that because despite its encounter with mercantile Europe, India's whole approach to Europe has been a value-based approach. And what Rabindranath Tagore once described as culture for humanity. Now, that culture for humanity was restored for a while after the Second World War, but subsequently that has been lost, just as Europe has lost its identity as Christendom. There was a stable world order, and in the middle was Christendom, and it was taken as a frontier to push back on illiberalism, to push back on something that militates against commonsensical righteousness. Now, having lost that status, it now wants to influence the rest of the world to also lose its own identity. From a very Indian perspective, we saw the ridiculous interference by Europe in our forming our own citizenship laws. Now, Europe wants to tell us what our citizenship law should be. Having lost control over its own identity of citizenry, Europe now wants to dictate terms to others on their citizens' identity. A second example would be the way Europe sermonizes countries on the quality of democracy and elections. We have faced this for quite some time now. Now, in India's neighboring country, Bangladesh, an elected government was thrown out of office and an unelected, illegal, illegitimate regime has taken charge. And Europe, all the European ambassadors in Delhi, they traveled to Dhaka to embrace this government. So what happens to values? So Europe needs to sit back and rethink where it stands today and how best to recover its own identity. Thank you.
Thank you, Kanchan. And last but not least, your fellow colleague from the Ludwig University of Public Service, Liliana. The floor is yours, Liliana.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much to the organizers. Thank you very much to Gladen and Samir for the invitation. I'm very honored to be here and to discuss this extremely important topic. Just as for the beginning, European Union, 27 member states. Okay, we are not the United States of Europe. We are 27 totally different states, okay, with different interests and different values. And we are independent sovereign states, and there is no one-fit-all solutions. So let's differentiate. We are not one whole organism. We are 27 different countries. My colleague from Armenia quoted President Juncker. Let me quote Madam President von der Leyen from 2019, 11 December, and the moment when the European Commission adopted the Green Deal policy with the primary goal of achieving climate neutrality by 2050. And Madam President described this moment as a man on the moon moment. And she said that we do not have all of the answers yet, but this is just the start of the journey. Well, we are sitting here in this room 5 years later, and we still do not have all of the answers yet. While this big man on the moon moment seems a little bit lost in the fog, the European bureaucrats have already started their own journey into the space, unfortunately leaving our competitiveness behind. And well, many peoples are raising the alarm, but in space, without the air, as we can all imagine, sound does not transmit. So the reality, unfortunately, was totally lost, as my colleague István mentioned. And now, a couple of comments regarding the statements that were done by my colleagues in this panel. We need both interests and values. Well, maybe. The problem is that the so-called European values have been weaponized by Brussels elite. And I believe from my perspective it's very, very visible because I'm Polish, living in Hungary. And I believe our two nations know very well how the so-called European values can be taken against you. And I believe the current situation in Poland is the best example of it. We were accused of totally abandoning European values. And now all of the investigations toward the country were stopped. And imagine what was the only milestone that was achieved by the new government. Well, the only milestone that was achieved was the change of the government. Okay, so we need to understand that there's no such thing as the European values, because the values that we had were totally weaponized by the current Brussels elite. And just one last thing, my last message: we need to start cooperation rather than the confrontation, because I believe in all of our interest is the peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liliana, and thank you all for respecting your speaking time. This leads us to a broad scale of open discussion in the following 40 minutes. But before I open the open discussion to the rest of the participants, I have received 2 inquiries on behalf of the panel for short comments. Giovanna or Anna first.
Okay, so I just want to say to the last presentation, I think we didn't say that we need more values or objectives, so this is not the point. So in my perspective, values are intangible goals, so it's not the focus of politicians. Politicians need to focus on interests and try to figure out the common interests. So the question is that, of course, we are associated with bureaucracy. This is not the point, because each rule that Europe imposes means costs and means litigancy and so on. So we are, another question, and you focused that very well. We are 27 countries with 27 cultures. That's why I said that it's very difficult to think that we can achieve one European identity. We will have always not one European identity, several European identities. This is the challenge of Europe. And also, values serves to guide decisions. Values are not tangible goals, are intangible. They serve to guide. This is the...
Thank you, and now Joanna.
Thank you. Just I strongly disagree with the assessment that there are 27 member states with the different values in the European Union, because the Article 2 of the Treaty on the European Union says the Union is founded on the values of respect for human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, and respect for human rights. If we are not agreeing on this, I don't know why we are discussing it all.
Yes.
Thank you, Joanna. And before the open discussion really starts, Janusz, in 1 minute response.
I would like to thank you for the statement, Anna, Miguel dos Santos, and Istvan Keys. And I would like to add that, in my opinion, Europe needs strong leaders, leaders who have a vision. I respect such leaders, even if I do not entirely agree with them. Such a leader is centrally Viktor Orban, in my opinion, who fights for Hungarian sovereignty. What is missing in the European Union is an understanding of national interest. From the position of Poland, I do not have the right to lecture, for example, the Portuguese or the Hungarian, but to look for field of cooperation in order to make our nation stronger through this cooperation. Therefore, I will respectfully listen to the Portuguese point of view, for example, matters concerning South America, but as a former vice president of Polish oil and gas company, the biggest gas company in Poland, I will always support, for example, the project to import LNG gas from Poland to Hungary. To conclude, if we want to save the European Union project, we should fight with the German egoism, remember, and cooperate with respect for national interest.
Thank you, Janusz. We have very diverse views on this panel, which is great. Now, let's see. There are going to be plenty of questions. First, I've seen a question from Poland, and please stick yourself to 2 minute stops limited.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I would like to second Anna and Liliana voices from the panel that there is no community of values in the European Union anymore, even though the community of values was inscribed in the treaties itself. Nevertheless, even though we do not have anymore a community of values, European Union tries to impose, not only in EU, but also globally, the distorted set of principles, often openly opposing unalienable rights presented and agreed upon in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, especially while weaponizing those principles when dealing with Africa, Middle East, or Asia. And there is no community of values in Europe. Much more of community of values may be observed between Central European countries and Africa, Central European countries and Middle East, Central European countries and Asia, than between the Western European countries and those regions. International institutions like European Union or United Nations even do not understand that in the state without this community of values, they have to focus themselves on the community of interests instead of community of values, because the community of interest is the basis for international cooperation, while community of values is just a basis for a nation building or a state building enterprise, and we do not need any state building efforts from European Union or United Nations itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Question over there. The floor is yours.
Hi, Nina from the University of Banja Luka. Very interesting debate, and I'm really looking forward to your reactions as well. I would like to comment on a couple of discussants. First of all, I would like to comment on what my dear colleague from Montenegro, Jovana, said about the EU enlargement. I would just like to remind you, last year, former EU Commissioner Verhelyi emphasized that the enlargement is more than ever a geostrategic investment in our shared prosperity and security. And this was led after Moldova and Ukraine were given were open accession talks, while Bosnia and Herzegovina was left aside. We in the Balkans need to understand that the enlargement has been a geostrategic political investment from the very beginning. And if we look how Romania or Bulgaria entered the EU, that would be one example. So the sooner we understand that, the better for us. Andras talked about a lack of confidence within the EU, and I would say outside of the EU, but also lack of credibility, not only externally, but internally as well. And Liliana talked about the non-existence of the EU values, or better say, how the EU values have been contested, how the EU has contested so many of its values within Brussels first, but also in other countries as well. For Anna, I have to bring it to you, EU values, whatever they are called, democracy, rule of law, are very, very tangible in the Balkans. So for the countries that would like to come closer to the EU, somehow these values become very tangible. They become part of the criteria for the accession. And in other words, these criteria would be very difficult to be met by some of EU members, not to mention the countries that are in the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one sentence. Yeah. Go ahead.
Just to say one thing. When I said about intangible, you don't have a decision saying, I want democracy. This is not tangible. How do you get democracy? This is tangible. Okay? This is the difference.
It's not.
Thank you.
I'm a lawyer. I know what I mean.
Let's go with the next question.
Thank you. I don't know if I'm the only one in the room at this stage, but I feel like I don't know what we're talking about anymore. I mean, maybe we should have started with saying which values we consider European values and which do we consider principles, because I think if this conversation was about scripting principles as opposed to values, it would have been a much easier conversation and we would have much easier way of agreeing. And I think we all see convergence in this room while we respect each other's different views. But I'm confused by the term of values-based foreign policy at this stage. And I think, Istvan, if you could then perhaps explain, if you don't want that, what is it that you would call the foreign policy that the EU should have, and in what ways? Because you did say pursue national interest, but then, you know, what happens with principles if you don't want to call them values, or if we don't call them values? Because I suppose we do agree that, say, rule of law is a principle, and I think rule of law is the same in India as it would be in Europe in terms of the respect of it. Human rights can be very problematic because it is either political and cultural rights versus economic and social rights. But if we don't agree on that, then let's talk about human dignity. And I don't think that's very different in a different cultural context. So perhaps you can comment on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I give the floor, let's collect 2-3 more questions or comments. The colleague next to, okay, those 3 and next, and then I will give the possibility to answer. There you go. Next to. There.
Thank you. I would just like to bring one point of view to this table. First of all, EU is the 3rd largest economy in the world. It feels like we are one small little country that doesn't know how to deal with its affairs. It was the 2nd largest till April this year. Secondly, the EU was created to hold peace for the member states, and it delivered its primary mission for 70 years. I don't know why, what are we talking about? I mean, we have never had such a long-lasting peace in Europe as we have it today. Yes, at our borders there are troubles, but EU has lived in peace, and that was the primary reason why we put EU together. Next one is, which I'm very surprised that nobody mentions, EU is a project. It's a project to bring the member states together to address the issues that we believe as member states can do together better than each individual state. We are delivering on that. It's an incredible project. It's the most advanced political structure that's been created in the modern human society. And we're even showing the way where the weaknesses of UN are, because we have executive tools as well in order to deliver on action plans, on investments, on agreed agendas. So instead of constantly just trying to bring it apart, let's continue to focus on how we can keep this project together, because it's hope for the world. It's still hope for the world. It's still the world with the most diversified cultural framework, as the colleague from India said, we are losing. We are not losing it. But Europe, in the last 7 years, my dear colleagues, had to face 7 major crises that each of them could bring any kind of country down. And yes, we are following up, yes, we are seeing now the troubles of that, including Brexit, including the refugee crisis, including the financial crisis, including the social crisis, including the Trump tax crisis. And I'm really inviting you, let's try to see the positive elements and build on them and try to overcome the challenges that we are facing right now. Because it's really hurting me personally to listen to all these critical points of view without any acknowledgement of this incredible peace project that is undergoing right now, a severe crisis, but we will get out of it. And we will find a way like we always did in the last 70 years.
Thank you very much. The gentleman over there raised scan.
Yes, yeah, just very quick. I mean, I know that Germany bashing is as Polish as pierogi, but I cannot let this go through with any, at least a quick rejection, because there is a lot of glee I sense about what's going on in Germany, but I just want to remind everyone, if Germany goes down a cliff, it will drag everybody down with them. It's the most important economic partner of Poland, so the gentleman from Poland should keep that in mind as well. It's the most important trading partner of Hungary, so I know it's a lot of fun to poke fun at the Germans. I do it myself all the time on social media, but in reality, that is not a good thing. It's the biggest net contributor to the European Union. It was the biggest backer of the expansion towards the East in 2004. I have to admit, if the EU is such a secret hidden project for German imperialism, why did everybody want to join it? So it's always fun, again, mocking the Germans. As I said, I'm Austrian, I do it all the time, it's part of my DNA, but I think we should be a little bit careful. If you knock out the main pillar of a building, the whole roof comes down, and that's the same case here.
Thank you. Given the fact that we have so many questions, I will ask you to try to sum it up in one minute, your questions and remarks. There was one there over there. The floor is yours.
Try to be short on several comments. First, recently I was with Mr. Gupta 1 month ago to the Valde Club, actually, and the most shocking experience was how Europe generally is being treated as less and less significant generally in the world. We are occupied with ourselves, but the world is going, further with much development, with vitality and so on, and we are declining. The second issue, speaking about the values that Jovana mentioned, actually, the problem is with the interpretation of those values. Me and Ms. from Portugal understand human rights totally differently. And the problem is that the way Europe is interpreting that today are suicidal, actually, which birth rate and fertility rate, which is 1.6, is showing. And final point, actually, when we speak about the values and repercussions for fertility, which is the most dramatic and demographic problem, those two things are intertwined, definitely. Of course, we mentioned fall of Christianity and so on. But when you take a look about Russia, Turkey, Iran, many other countries in which definitely you have not this liberal education, still there are extreme problem with the fertility rate. All those countries, including India, are falling below 2. So I think most important reasons, on one is materialism that is dominating everywhere, and another one, popular culture with social networks that is really spreading like a cancer. And the question for us, I'm finishing, is to think about the world in which China is having last year only 9 million of kids, while Nigeria is having 8 million. Why is this happening?
Thank you very much. There was 2 questions common. We're that side of the table.
Me first, or?
You too.
Thank you so much. First of all, it's funny for me to hear so much talk about a value-based foreign policy, because I don't think the EU actually carries out a value-based foreign policy. Most of it, sometimes, unfortunately, in my opinion, is just a lot of greenwashing, pinkwashing, and whatever you call it. But also, for me, it's quite sad to see European values reduced to just promoting gender-neutral toilets in the Middle East. I have never heard, personally, I was looking up on the internet, I have never heard of any program in the Middle East. But, maybe it's true, somebody said it, it's true, we should look more and listen more to people who are trying to get in the European Union, to understand that what makes Europe attractive is, the rule of law, the fact that it's trying to also make vulnerable groups feel more secure, promoting an inclusive society. I don't see how this could be possibly a bad thing. Thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman.
I think if you say that there are no values in Europe, you're simply saying there is no civilization in Europe. If we have a civilizational value, then we believe that Europe is a civilization. And secondly, one of the fundamental values of the European civilization is individual freedom and national sovereignty. So you cannot say in the age of sovereignty that sovereignty is not a value. And who is destroying the national sovereignty in Europe? The European Union. So I agree that there are values, but at the same time, one of the biggest destroyer of values is the European Union.
Marton?
2 very quick comments following up on what just been said. I think we tend to focus too much on the values which are not values in a way that they are still politically contested. Whereas those fundamental values on which we base our civilizations go unquestioned. And I think this is why we're having this kind of a mismatch in this conversation as well, because if we're talking about European values, some think about transgender toilets, while others think about that all men are created equal by God, and then we should respect each other's freedoms. And these are not the two same. These are not solid on a level that they would be comparable. But my real question would be to the panelists who do not come from Europe, that how do you think Europe could regain that kind of a credibility and weight and charisma to some extent that our partners would once again believe us? Because what I see right now is that most of our partners say that, well, yeah, Europe is going down anyway. We don't have to do anything about it. Time just going to solve this, and they're just going to disappear. Whereas the European ambition doesn't seem to be like that. So how we can square the circle and how we can be relevant again globally.
Thank you. And there was one more question.
So I'm also from Poland, Krzysztof Zalewski, and I'm very pleased that we can hear such a diversity of views. And that's something which constitutes Europe for me. And this principle of equality, solidarity, and freedom of speech included. I think we are one of the few continents which can cherish and live these values. And from my perspective, what we see now among our European friends and partners is a sign of crisis, because Europe is in deep European economic crisis and social crisis. There is a blame game. That's a very natural thing. So I think it's great that we are having this conversation, but what we maybe try to do, instead of blaming each other, is just to try to basically find solution on how to move forward. And that would be, I think, very productive for us in Europe and also for the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And since there were so many questions towards our panelists, I shall give the opportunity to answer those questions. Anna.
So I would like to start. Probably I wasn't clear enough, but I'm not rejecting the European project. Okay, this need to be very clear. So for us, I had 3 minutes to expose or to answer to the guidelines roundtable, and so I tried to answer to the question. Values or interests? I said both. We need everything because I truly believe in everything. So to this, and when I said that the values are more intangible, are in the fact of I'm a politician, so probably the lady there is a university, comes from the academia. So what I was trying to say to politicians is that I expect from the politicians to be more effective instead of questioning the values, because the values are already put it on the letter of Europe, they are established. This is not a question. So what I am expecting from the politicians is the answer to how could I be more democratic? How could I be, or how could I give to the people more freedom, more economic growth, and so on? So this, we need to be more effective instead of always talking about things that are not tangible. And this is, we need to change people's lives, and we need to focus on that. And what I saw in European Union and in European establishment is too much bureaucracy, and we need to stop that and to focus more on change people's life and to facilitate the path to European, always respecting that we are so different culturally speaking. For a Portuguese, is not the same. The weather, the food, the way of living is so different from the people from the north of Europe. But is everything okay? Everyone is available and everyone is respectful, and we need to respect the diversity. This is my main
Thank you.
idea.
Thank you, Kanchan.
Just to add to what I said, I mean, I think we have to look at it from two perspectives. One is Europe meeting Europe. That is the bulk of the discussion here. Since I don't come from Europe, I can tell you about Europe meeting the rest of the world, especially the part of the world where I come from. And we often hear the assertion of shared values. So if you are not sure what are your values, then how can you even talk about shared values or upholding those values? So it's for you to clear up your own self-doubts and come to a conclusion, number one. Number two, you can have a principle of adherence to democracy, because in any case, I mean, democracy is something which happens, I mean, which many countries are committed to. But when you start weaponizing that principle stroke value of democracy, that is when problem starts happening. And you begin evangelizing your version of that value. So it no longer stays a shared value. So these are the questions that really confront Europe's interaction with the rest of the world, with what Samir described as the global south. That needs to be looked at very closely. And as far as Europe calling Europe is concerned, that's a call which you people need to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Kanchan. Lilian, I also received several comments there.
Yes, thank you. One comment regarding the criticism of the European Union. Well, when I was a child and I did something wrong and my mother criticized me, my main goal was to improve myself. And I believe that should be also the goal of this discussion. So we are not criticizing EU because, I don't know, I want to leave the EU. No, but I believe the discussion nowadays is very emotional. So we cannot even criticize certain policies. We cannot criticize certain institutions, because if I criticize, it means that I want to leave. No, my goal, the goal I believe of every European citizen, is to improve the institutions that we are part of. That's one thing. And regarding the bashing of Germany, Ralph, of course, we're all connected to German economy, especially in Central Eastern Europe. But I personally would rather expect from the leader of the European Union, if we look at the economy, to rather conduct decisions that are in strategic interests of its own country. And I would rather probably not implement certain, especially climate policies that were done. And I believe this one can be laughed at. Thank you.
Thank you. And one response here.
Well, it's kind of funny that this kind of criticism towards Brussels and about the respect for the rule of law and democracy comes from the country which actually is breaking those rule of law standards. It's not following what comes from Brussels, and it's really hardly harmonized with any of the EU's policies. That's the first thing. The second thing, that's true that it's easier to explain what are the European values and what the EU, what makes the EU great comes from the one who is outside of the European Union. Montenegro is negotiating for 12 years for the EU membership, and public support for the EU membership is 80%. So in the Western Balkans, in Montenegro, there is bigger credibility, bigger trust in the European Union than in any the European Union's member state. That's the first thing. The second thing is what we see and what our citizens see in the European Union. It's really easy to explain that the European Union for us is a better place for living. It's some desired place. It's something which is better than what we are living at the moment, because the Western Balkans never experienced democracy as such. So for us, even Europe as the name is a value itself. So it's really and how to, sorry, just one more sentence, how to make Europe great again. Let's use this unpopular phrase from the re-elected president of the United States of America. It should go, the European Union should go without double standards, both in its own backyard and when it comes to the candidate countries. And also strengthening of democracy has to go hand in hand, both in the European Union, in the EU member states, and also in the Western Balkans and the EU candidate countries. So one approach, European values are common to all of us and for all of us.
Thank you, Ivan. And before I take the last comment in the course of the open discussion, I pass the word to István because he also got some questions there.
Thank you, Balázs. Now, of course, I mean, we could have this discussion for hours, especially if we go to values. First, I just want to say that I'm very pro-European Union. So despite the fact, and I think actually most Hungarians are very pro-European Union, I think that's much more, which binds us, even if I look at somebody from Portugal or Sweden or anywhere in the region which would divide us. So I think in this sense, and I never said we don't have values, I always said we have values. The problem is that we're focusing on values which might divide us and not on values which brings us together, agreeing with what Martin said. So what are the values? It's hard, as I said, this is a philosophical question. We could talk about this for hours, but I think focusing on things like, rule of law. I'm not sure actually rule of law is something which means the same in Germany, where you had the Rechtsstaat, and in Hungary, or, Singapore has the rule of law, most likely, but is it similar to what you have in America or the UK? I think it's debatable. And also, if you look at what's happening with Hungary, as has been mentioned, and what was happening with Poland, we have these, let's say, values being weaponized against member states because they don't follow some certain elements. For example, which is political in a sense, because, for example, if you look at the EU Justice Scoreboard, Hungary is somewhere in the middle. And that's not made by Hungarians, and that's made by the EU. You have countries who are doing far less, like Bulgaria or Romania. We still don't have these proceedings going against Bulgaria or Romania. Also, if you look at infringement procedures, which showing how a country is following EU law or not, again, Hungary is somewhere in the middle. So there are countries which are not following EU law much more than Hungary. Still, you don't have funds being withheld. So what we don't like is kind of this double standards and these kind of feelings that you use terms or values like the rule of law to punish other countries, and which has been doing. This has been done to other countries as well outside of Europe, as has been mentioned. So and going to the question I got, as I said, it's a difficult question. I mean, I'm a realist. I'm also pretty cynical. So I would try to follow as much as possible the national interest. So if our national interest is to buy gas from certain countries, I would buy gas from certain countries, and I don't really care about their human rights records. A personal experience. One of the best and nicest and friendliest countries I visited in the world was Oman. Now, Oman has a sultan. They have Sharia law. If you steal, they cut off your hands. Do I think this is okay? No. But as a Hungarian, I don't think it's my job to go to Oman and tell the Omanis, look, guys, you're doing it very wrong, so you should do it like this. Perhaps this is a kind of a small-minded Hungarian attitude, because we're a small country and we don't think it's our job to do that. But I think in the end, we shouldn't. So it's not our role to go to different countries, tell them how to do things, tell them their culture is wrong. We should help them as much as we can. We should educate them. But in the end, those countries should make their decisions. And just going back to Hungary, if Hungary, let's say, most of Hungarians don't want same-sex marriage, then Hungary should have the right to don't have same-sex marriage, because the people want that. It's just kind of a...
Thank you. Glenn?
Sorry for my voice as well. Thanks very much for this spirited discussion, and I'll just make one comment as someone holding American and European, or Hungarian rather, citizenship, so I have a stake in it as well. I think part of the reason that we're having difficulty, or I think there's a structural difficulty in talking about European values, is that if we consider back over the last 50 years and we try to identify a handful of years in which the self-perception of the West, the self-perception of Europeans and Americans was at its most delusional, that period is immediately after 1991. We could say it's in like 1992 and 1993, right around the time that the European Union was coming into existence. And what I mean when I say that the self-understanding of the West was delusional at that point, during the Cold War, under the bipolar period, the Western side built up a very, very large, like freighted and heavy narrative about the sources of its own success. In the post-war period, that story was heavily inflected by liberalism. So when the other side collapsed right after 1991, the thing that was left standing on the Western side from an ideological standpoint was a very, very heavily freighted liberal interpretation of the principles of the West, which were uniquely responsible for winning the Cold War. And that mindset, without a lot of deliberation, heavily inflected the way that the principles of Western institutions were interpreted. It took maybe another 20 or 30 years for that to be carried out in policies, which are some of the ones that we're now reacting to. But in this sense, it's not just a question of principles yes, principles no, but that right after the Cold War, the self-understanding of those principles was considered the main reason for Western success, and the version of those principles that was on offer was a heavily inflected one, which no longer maps onto the current global reality.
Thank you, Glenn. And through the last comment, Samir.
No, just thank you for this discussion. I think I truly now believe that Indo-European people is a thing. You go into an Indian debate on the future of India and you'll hear all sorts of views and you'll come out thinking, what the hell is this country? So I think thank you for being us. But just a quick remark. Look, I think the notion that so many people want to enter Europe is a certification for European sanctity is false. People come to Europe for jobs, for betterment of their lives, for professional advancement, and for getting basic human requirements that are not available in their own continents and countries because they were ravaged, pillaged by the same people who live in Europe. So let's be very clear here that when a migrant comes to Delhi, New Delhi, and I tell them the air is not that good, why are you coming? He tells me I've come here to fill my stomach. I'm not coming here for the quality of air. And that is true even for Europe. So when you name small countries with hopeless economies and use that as a certificate for your somehow great existence, I think you're delusional. So the delusion did not end in 1991-92. We understand that too. And I tell that to the Indian policymakers as well. Just because you have people flocking from the neighborhood wanting to come into India does not make India a successful economic model. It just means that others are worse off. And sometimes they're attracted to light. So that's the first quick observation. Last observation, I think economic diplomacy helps. And in that sense, you have Europe, which has used the purse strings paid by the taxpayer of the richer economies of the continent to curry favor and curry a certain space for yourselves in different countries where you have used economic diplomacy. To believe that affiliation will last beyond the last paycheck is again foolish. So just because some countries like you because of the money you give them does not mean that that is love or that is sustainable. It is transactional. And that European value itself is a transactional value. It is not a value, it is interest.
Thank you, Samir. Now do we have to conclude the open discussion and come to the final closing remarks of our initiators, now starting on the other side of the table. Anahid, in 1 minute, if it's possible.
I will try to summarize my takeaways, which is that we heard different interpretations or analysis that basically says the EU is in a perma-crisis. And it's actually a term that was coined by a European think tanker for Europe. But I hear very little on how to resolve this perma-crisis. And actually, I think it would be nice to have had rather a discussion on how we can resolve the perma-crisis and try to have a bit more concrete discussion on that. I would repeat what I suggested, which is that we actually need much more strategic vision at the EU level on what it is, what it tries to achieve. And I think it's also about developing strategic autonomy, even away from the US.
Thank you, Anahid. István.
I just want to say kind of two things as takeaways. I think one is, let's focus on things which bind us together and don't focus on those things which not. So let's find that as a European Union, because I think it's a very useful project. We cannot be competitive without the European Union. We have no chance being competitive against China or India or America as small nation states. So we need the European Union, but we have to find those common areas where we have to work together. And the second one, I think, is European leaders should listen much more to their own people. So the problem is we have an elite problem where we have parties who are getting voted on, and when they don't actually deliver their promises and don't listen to their people. I think that's anti-democratic and it's wrong.
Thank you, István. János.
Thank you very much for the discussion. I was Deputy Minister of Agriculture and Deputy Minister of State Assets in Poland. So believe me, I cannot say anything good about the Eurocrats. In my opinion, Eurocrats are corrupt and lazy. And in my opinion, Poland is in the European Union because Poland should realize, pursue Polish interests, not interests of Eurocrats in Poland. It is my opinion. So that's why I think, and this is the comment to the lady on the left hand, that in my opinion, European Union fight with the crisis that creates for itself. For example, German egoism, as I said, led to war to the Ukraine. And I repeat that now Germany wants to make money from the reconstruction of Ukraine. In my opinion, it's absolutely disgusting.
Thank you, Janusz. Anna?
So I just want to say that I truly believe in Europe. And this is a very complicated issue to have several dimensions, several perspectives. So this is good when we can dialogue about them and have this conversation. So I truly believe in Europe. I think that we need everyone and we need to respect each of us. But as a politician, I expect more action from politics and less political speeches.
Thank you, Anna. And eventually, Ivana.
Just to start with the joke, even if you're inside or outside of the European Union, there are the countries which you cannot ignore, and Germany is one of them. And then recommendations for the reform of the European Union. European Parliament should have more influence. There should be qualified majority voting when it comes to enlargement process, and there should be more citizens' control and influence when it comes to the decision making. When it comes to the Western Balkans and candidate countries, there should be recommendations on the within the rule of law mechanism or tool. There should be a political plan for each country, what can be achieved by 2030. And finally, there should be sanctions and incentives if the country is not aligning with the European values.
Thank you all very much for participating in this lively panel discussion. Thank you all.